welcome to the Firestone Consulting Group webinar series. Today's webinar is Bonding 101, Intro to Surety Bonds. Real quick, Firestone Consulting Group, we work with leaders and owners in the construction industry to build businesses for the lifestyles they desire through leveraging their people and by developing a well-oiled system to operate their business. Our methods are based on real-world experiences of actually running and growing contracting businesses. With years of hands-on experience, our team of advisors and consultants will help you to define your goals, develop a plan to achieve them, and help you implement that plan. And most importantly, be right there with you to celebrate your successes. Like I was saying before we were getting connected there, and didn't realize we didn't have audio, but I am Matt Firestone, president of Firestone Consulting Group. And I am pleased to welcome our guests from Gene Lilly Surety Bonds. Gene Lilly Surety Bonds was founded in 1965 by former surety company underwriter Gene Lilly. In the years following, it has grown into the Midwest's largest surety-only agency. Gene Lilly focuses on its customer surety program and ways to maximize their relationships for clients. With me today are bond producers Tom King and Seth Whedon. Tom joined the agency in 2011 as an intern and then full-time in 2014 after graduating from the University of Nebraska College of Law and University of Nebraska with a master's in public accountancy program. Holy cow, Tom, that's a mouthful. Seth joined the agency earlier this year after having worked as an underwriter for a national surety company for more than 7 years. Seth holds his ASFB certification and a master's in business administration from the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State. Tom, Seth, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it. And Seth, that AFSB, that's Associate and Fidelity Surety Bonds, correct? Is that what your certification was on that?
That is correct. We, as underwriters at the surety company I worked at, we're required to get that done within the first year and a half. It's a series of 5 tests that basically covers everything from contract surety to commercial surety to things on the criminal side.
Okay, well, and so
long process, it takes some work. So
yeah, certainly so. And so to give all of our attendees a little insight as to, as you probably know, you may know, the layout of a typical surety world arrangement is that you have an agent or a broker who is Gene Lilly Surety Bonds is an agency or a brokerage, as it's sometimes referred to, that sells. We are a non-captive, meaning that we don't sell to one specific or sell the surety bonds from one specific surety company. We have contracts with about 15, 16, I mean, a lot of different surety companies. There's a couple hundred of them in the market, but we'll keep contracts with about 15 that we can go to place surety business, depending on certain criteria or characteristics or certain opportunities present themselves better to certain surety companies. Lion's share of the surety work in our business is handled by probably, I'd say, 6 to 7 companies. But when we talk about Seth having 7 years of underwriting experience and an AFSB certification, that talks about his prior stop in the surety industry was as a company underwriter. And myself as an agent would submit a contractor's file and job opportunity to him. So just a little lay of the land there. Seth has always been the side of the table that reviewed the underwriting portfolio and profile from both the financial statements of the contractor to the job and all things between there. So just a little insight. He's been bringing a lot of value to our agency as having sat on the other side of the table for quite a while. So with that being said, I suppose we probably.
Tom, I'm going to stop sharing my slides here and let you pull up your slide deck if that works for you.
Oh, and share my screen onto yours then?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can make sure. I got 2 screens here, so I will whip this up here and make sure I got to make sure I get onto the right screen there then.
And for those of you that are in attendance, feel free to ask any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will get those to Tom and Seth to answer. So.
Okay. So is my screen presented here? Intro to Surety Bonding presented by Gene Lilly Surety Bonds. Matt, are you getting that?
It is. I sure can.
Okay, now I got to make sure we get the advanced slide correctly here. Yeah, because I am not advancing correctly on my side. There we go. Okay, so when we go to the first step, we kind of want to outline what the relationships are in the surety world. We talked about Seth and I, and me as an agent. Seth is formerly an underwriter, but the surety company, we will hire the underwriters. I represent the surety companies. They're a party to a three-part agreement between the contractor and the owner. Effectively, the surety arrangement is that a owner is going to hire a contractor, or a contractor is going to hire a subcontractor to perform a task for them. Whether it's the masonry, the electrical, whether it's to build the entire building, whatever it is, there's a contract that they write up that says, Mr. Contractor, you're going to agree to do this in exchange for this sum of money, and I'm gonna pay you that. And the owner, though, says, well, what if there's a problem with the performance on the project that can't be remedied because it causes a big enough problem that the contractor's out of business? Or secondly, because many times these projects are publicly owned, whether it's a courthouse, a road, a bridge, a school, there's no lien rights available. The material supplier, whether it's a supply house, sand and gravel operation, or a diesel fuel supplier, they can't attach a lien if they don't get paid by either the contractor or a subcontractor that's either gone out of business or had some sort of significant problem. And enter the surety into the role. The surety comes in and reviews the financials of the contractor as well as their abilities on these projects, and says to the owner, Mr. Owner, Mrs. Owner, I believe that I can support this contractor. If they have a problem, we'll step into their shoes and take over. So the long and short is that the surety company is making a guarantee to the owner on behalf of the contractor if the contractor can't fulfill the contract. So going forward, you'll see the term obligee down there on the bottom. That's best remembered as who the contractor is obligating, or the bond is obligating itself to. So typically that's going to be the owner of the project. Lincoln Public Schools, maybe it's the state of Nebraska. We're here in Nebraska, so maybe it's one of the local municipalities in the area, but it could also be a general contractor, because a sub could obligate itself to a general contractor on a subcontract bond. And that is separate from the general's bond with the owner. We'll dive into that a little bit more later, but many times you're going to see the surety companies be listed as the company, or the surety program on the bond itself, and it's going to have a common name as an insurance company. That's just because they commonly come out of the same organization. So then, of course, you're going to see the contractor on there as well. Surety is divided into two separate types, and we're going to focus very heavily on contract surety today. I think it's probably the most interested one from the crowd that we're typically working with. Surety is divided into two sides of the house, one being contract surety, or bonds that guarantee a contract for performance. And then the other side would be commercial surety. And this is court bonds, license and permit bonds, notary bonds, other miscellaneous bonds. And the easiest way to think of those are license and permit bonds are typically payable to a public subdivision, i.e. your code regulation division, saying that as a licensed electrician in the city of Omaha, I will adhere to the following code. And if on any project, it doesn't have to be one specific, it's just a license to work in the city. And if I don't, I put up a $10,000 bond that could be claimable as a penalty by the city. That doesn't guarantee a contract of any sort. So for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to generally and almost entirely focus on the relationship of the contract surety, which is going to be your bid bonds and your performance and payment bonds, and how those interact with each other when you're estimating a job, where you need one, when you need one. If a bid spec says I need this, how do you get that?
Hey, Tom, real quick on that previous slide there. So if we see where a contractor says they're licensed and bonded, that doesn't necessarily mean there's any protection to that owner, that it's all that is what you were describing is this municipal bond that says they're going to adhere to it. So there's no guarantee to the owner that they will get the project complete or pay their bills.
Correct. I'll give you just a real quick example. I had a supply house call me on a mechanical contractor, and mechanical contractor was doing a project in Omaha. I don't know what's ever happened to this, so I'll leave their name out of it, of course. But supply house says, "Hey, I need to file a claim on a bond on this," and it was a private job. It was a recreational facility owned by a private organization that features a bar and a golf course. And he had said, "Yeah, I got a bond here." The guy said, "Licensed and bonded. I need to file a claim on its bond." And I said, "I'm sorry, we don't have any bonds that we wrote to the owner on that project. I'm sure he was a mechanical, and I'm sure you have a valid dispute." And he said, "Well, he told me he was bonded." And I said, "Well, you mean he had a City of Omaha contractor's bond?" He goes, "Yeah, exactly. I want to file a claim on it. I never got paid." I said, "Well, I'm sorry. That's going to be more comparable to a code enforcement division. And also, if they're an alien organization, so they're not local to the state, a lot of states require a bond to make sure that the contractor pays their taxes. That doesn't have any guarantee to the suppliers. That doesn't have any guarantee to the subcontractors. That doesn't help anybody downstream." So in that case, this guy said, "So I'm SOL, man." And I said, I'm sorry. I would help you if I could, but that bond was not for your protection because it was payable to the local code enforcement division or maybe the local taxing authority. Yes, we did one, but it wasn't the type of bond that I think you're thinking it is, sir. So
Sure.
if that kind of is maybe a good example of how that can get confusing at times, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe not so much for this crowd, but I think that is definitely something to have out there. So
Yeah, and you see it commonly written on the side of somebody who's maybe a growing contractor that says that everybody knows in that first year they saw somebody's van that said licensed, bonded, and insured. Well, they sure probably were, but not in the context of the bonds that we're talking about for the majority of the public projects that are sizable, especially.
great.
Um,
Thanks.
yeah, you bet. And so, to delve into the bid bonds, performance payment bonds, effectively, the performance and payment bonds are the actual guarantees on the project, and the bid bond is the pre-qualification. So we'll kind of get a little deeper there. We talked about this slide a little bit right out of the get-go, but we're guaranteeing specific performance of a contract to a standard that is determined typically by an engineer, an architect. On a subcontract bond, it is somewhat determined by the general contractor when they'll accept the project or accept the workmanship. But even then, they're going to refer up the stream a lot of times to say, "Mr. Architect, will you accept this or not?" Because they don't get paid unless the architect accepts it anyway. So many times it's going to go to who is supposed to be an independent third party. The most important, and actually typically the only time you're going to see a statutorily required bond, is actually the downstream payment to subcontractors, laborers, and suppliers, because this is facilitating the lien holders or facilitating the lack of lien holders' rights actually on the project. And effectively, if you were a supply house or you were a laborer and somebody didn't pay you on a project, there'd be no opportunity for recourse. So there's a national statute. It was called the Miller Act, and it's pretty much mirrored in almost every state with different dollar amounts. It was called the Federal Miller Act, and then states commonly referred to theirs as the Little Miller Act. It's Nebraska State Statute 52-118 that dictates what projects need to be bonded, and it's any expansion of a public space with a capital expenditure, so not a maintenance contract, although sometimes those are bonded. But anytime you expand a publicly owned facility on a capital improvement to the extent that it's greater than $25,000, the federal Miller Act calls for $100,000. It just kind of depends on who the owner is and where the funding is coming from. But those bonds are guaranteeing to the owner a completed project, and they're guaranteeing to the suppliers and subcontractors that they're going to get paid. So if you're a subcontractor on a school, the general's payment bond that he provided to the owner is your recourse, that if you're working for Acme Construction and they just decide that they're going to set sail for Portugal and retire and leave you hanging without paying your last check, you have a recourse on their payment bond. The additional benefits that are kind of unsung maybe, but are commonly acknowledged amongst our industry, is that there's a market benefit. It does provide a pre-qualification level to the contractors that are going to be bidding on a project. And effectively, the concept is that when you don't know anything about a sub pool, or the owner doesn't know anything about a general contractor's pool, at least requiring a bond requires some sort of showing of financial capacity and historical performance to be able to get to that table. So that there is always a contractor that says, well, I heard my competitor got a bond and you wouldn't believe how bad of an operator he is. Well, there is that, of course, that we always have to deal with and try to work our way through. But it does create a threshold or a barrier to entry on the market. We do hear some fantastic things that people tell us they're going to bid on from time to time. When Don Trump was elected in 2016, we got a couple of phone calls about some guys that were going to build the wall. And so you wouldn't believe the stuff that people would try to do if there was no barriers to entry. And it does kind of create a competitive pool of contractors that have been pre-qualified. Now, a lot of owners have gone to additional pre-qualification, but that is one specific thing that we try to always discuss with owners, and then as well as with general contractors, that when you're working with bondable subcontractors, you're generally working with a pool of subcontractors that have developed the financial strength and business acumen that is being shared with a surety company. So going forth, who requires these bonds? We were talking earlier, public sector. That's where their lion's share of these are going to be apparent. If you're putting up pole lights in a Kmart parking lot, or maybe it's a Home Goods parking lot, not likely to require them. If it's a city library parking lot and it's owned by the city, possibly going to have them. Probably going to have them, to be fair. State and local governments, anytime you're working for your Department of Roads or your Department of Transportation and you're working on something in that regard, you're probably almost guaranteedly going to see them. And then any real property, generally speaking, funded with taxpayer dollars. If you're working on a project that is funded by taxpayers, be aware that there's probably a bond requirement. And I always stress that, because every now and then somebody will figure out a way to bid a project and forget to put the bond in because they kind of forgot that part about, oh, I didn't know I was going to need that. Well, then the bond comes out of their side. If they're the low bidder, they have to pay it out of pocket. It's not a happy day for the contractor. So anytime there's no lien rights, just always keep that in mind. In the private sector, you do see bonds from time to time, and typically it's been pushed by a lending institution. And so in this case, think about a really large commercial property build out. Somebody says, I'm going to build a $20 million office complex building, and I need some guarantees that this project is not going to have a whole bunch of liens on it when we're done. And the bank says, we think that the contractor's qualified, but we're not specialists in that. So why don't you get a bond on this to make sure that that's a qualified, and we have a little financial guarantee on that contract. And then additionally, you'll see that multiple obligee rider. Typically, and this is a little bit deep into the weeds on surety, the bond is only for the benefit of the named party. So if John's development company is building a building and the bank is asking the contractor to get the bond before they'll agree to finance the project, the multiple obligee brings the bank in as a potential obligee on the bond. All you need to know in that case is that, yes, you got the owner you're working for, John's development, but you also have an agreement now with the bank that if they want you to finish the project and it's for your benefit as a contractor, they also have to pay you on it. They have to step into the shoes of the owner. So for public projects, almost always. For private projects, sometimes, if there's any federal money, to include HUD money. So for housing and urban development, if you're ever on a big commercial project, it's a big low-income multifamily, the general probably had to put up a bond on that, and they may ask for downstream bonds as well. Who also requires bonds? General contractor. We're just talking about that. This is a downstream risk mitigation tool that general contractors will use. A lot of times they'll look at critical path or large dollar figure subcontractors and try to divest themselves of some risk by purchasing a surety bond to guarantee that that contractor performs on the performance and then pays their bills. The majority of the surety claims in the world are actually what we would almost term nuisance, but supply house payment claims, and it typically actually comes in the form of either mechanicals or electricals. And it's usually an electrician that is either having trouble or a different general didn't pay them. And so the general that you're working for says, hey, I've kept you current. What's going on? And the other electrical says, well, I'm working for this other guy across town. He's got me strung out and I can't get any credit at the supply house. And so typically that starts a finger pointing, but that supply house files a claim on a bond. And so to insulate themselves from that at the general point, they ask for the subcontractors to bond those type of arrangements. So they're just trying to offset some risk, but they still typically will bond their entire portion of the project. And so when we talk about risk, a lot of times that brings up the concepts of surety versus insurance. And in the surety world, this is a credit function. This is more like a credit card, more like a bank loan. This is more like the borrowing of somebody else's financial strength in exchange for showcasing your own abilities, versus insurance, where they say, hey, we know everybody crashes a car sooner or later. So out of 150 F-150s, we know that there's going to be 10 of them that get wrecked, or whatever the number is. They come up with an actuarial number that's going to price out how to replace the number of quantity of goods and then make a little for themselves. Sureties say, no, we aren't going to expect any losses. We're only going to guarantee stuff that we don't expect to fail. And so they price it accordingly, such that the premium paid is supposed to cover the expense of the underwriting, not the potential pool to pay out on losses. And so the idea is that you couldn't pool enough money in premiums to make the product competitive to pay for a potential loss. As we all know, surety losses or contractor losses, when say a general contractor, what we say goes down or has a big face plant, maybe it's not just one job. Typically it's a whole string of jobs, and typically there's a whole string of subs that haven't been paid. And so it's not just the one job. Many times it's the one job that caused it, but it's not just the one job that has a whole stack of bills and uncompleted work on. So effectively, the surety is a credit arrangement, not an insurance arrangement. Further, there's a concept of recoverability. In the surety world, there's an indemnity agreement with the company and the contractor and the surety company and the owners in the surety company, meaning that the owners are personally guaranteeing that they will complete the project. And if they do not complete the project, they will make the surety whole after the fact if they have to pay out on a loss, which just means, in contrary to insurance, if you've bought insurance and you file a claim on your insurance, they don't come back and say, okay, well, we bought you a new pickup. Now give us all the money for the new pickup. And the difference here is that the surety bond is for the benefit of the owner. So it would be either and not the owner of the construction company, it's the owner of the project. So the surety is for the benefit of the school. Surety is the benefit of the taxpayer. The surety is offered by the contractor to the owner of the project to protect the owner of the project. Insurance is to protect the purchaser. In that case, the construction company, the electrician, the plumber, the steel erector, they purchase insurance to protect from their own perils and pay themselves. And that's a pretty important distinction that kind of drives why surety operates differently than insurance, but it is something to be aware of. And then, one thing I think we'll get into a little bit about the underwriting here, but I do want to make sure we take some time to talk about the differences between performance and payment bonds and bid bonds. We kind of flew by that. So, Seth, are you at a point right now you want to talk a little bit about underwriting and how we get to that point, and then we'll conclude on that, do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I think that's great. Seth, I'll let you run with a little bit of the underwriting knowledge, because that's kind of helpful to the whole program.
Okay, I'm going to request remote control. I can click through your slides then.
Okay, perfect. I'll give it to you. Should be good.
Okay. Yeah, as Tom was kind of getting into, the surety underwrites basically in two different areas. In Initially, they'll take into account the overall capacity of the contractor. That involves things just financial wherewithal, the experience, what kind of resources you have available to you, what size of jobs you want to look at, what your desired bond capacity is. So initially, an underwriter, when they get a submission, they'll look at that, go through everything with the agent to learn about the contractor, do a financial analysis, and really get to know the company as well as they can. And the next portion of that that they'll look at is project complexity. So if you get into a situation, they request a bond for a project, the underwriter is then going to look at the complexity of the project. Does it fit with your past experience? How complex is it in terms of, is it in the middle of a city? Is it out in the open, in the countryside? Things of that nature. So there's really two sides to the underwriting process that a surety goes through when looking at a bond request.
Yeah, I think it's we're looking at how capable is the contractor, both from operational capacity and a financial capacity, because like as a subcontractor pool, a lot of subs will say, well, we got to have a lot of our own cash because we got to pay our men, we got to pay our bills, we got to pay for stuff that happened. And we might be 30, 60, 90 days from some generals. So the subcontractors say, I got to build part of this job out of my checkbook. Surety company says, okay, well, how big's your checkbook? If you're going to have to bankroll it, then, let's talk about that. Or project complexity. Let's say you've always built simple structures, flat, single, easy. You've made tons of money doing it. And it's a great project and a great life. And you say, there's this hospital being built down the road. It's 12 stories tall. They got a radiation department. I want to do it. I've never done anything quite that complex. How does the surety respond to that? Well, let's talk about why we think we can be successful. And that's going into that project complexity. Styles of construction make a big difference there.
That's right. So the first thing we'll kind of cover is a contractor's capacity. And again, the kind of the overall financial wherewithal, experience, resources you have available to do the project that you want to, especially if there's a jump in job sizes. Tom was kind of mentioning there with the hospital project, or you're looking to grow and you want to increase your bond capacity. So there's three major underwriting principles that all underwriters kind of abide by, and this is generally referred to as the 3 C's in the surety world. The first one is capital, which is your overall financial wherewithal of the company, as well as the owners and the personal indemnitors. We'll take a look at things like your financial statements, your overall working capital, net worth of both the company and the individual owners that are also signing the indemnity agreement, or the personal indemnitors. The next one is the operational capacity. So this is just your capacity to do the jobs that you're looking at or asking for bonds for, or the desired bond capacity you want to be granted. If you're looking to grow, and that increased capacity requires things like you might need more equipment, you might need more manpower. Does your past experience, is it consistent with the type of job and the size of job that you're looking at? The third C is character, and that's the people within the organization. So the relationship between the bond agent, which, for example, Gene Lilly Surety Bonds has with their clients, plays a big part in the underwriting process for the underwriter and the surety. There's a trust factor that develops both between the agent and the contractor, as well as the agent and the surety. That takes a while to kind of develop, and the more you work with each other, the faster that develops. And so you take into things into consideration, such as references from other contractors, other subcontractor suppliers. Credit reports are involved in this. Just your overall community involvement, things of that nature to help support the character portion of it. Getting a little more into the capital side of things. Again, this is the overall financial wherewithal of the contractor. The first thing that they'll kind of look at is your financial statements. There's different levels of what's called financial presentation that a surety will look at. For example, are we looking at the QuickBooks in-house statement of a contractor versus a CPA prepared statement, such as a compilation, a review, or an audit? And general rule of thumb, the more accurate the statements, the higher bond capacity you can get. So what a surety is always looking for there is depending on the size of bonds you're looking at, a CPA prepared statement from an independent third party, usually on a yearly basis, that just goes in the end of your fiscal year, and presents a financial report that's used for your banks and the surety. So what they're looking for on those financial statements, one of the first things is working capital. This is just how well you can cash flow the project. It's your current assets minus your current liabilities. And that's generally any liabilities that are due within the next year, that need to be paid within the next year. Kind of a general rule of thumb that surety underwriters will look for on your financial statements when it comes to working capital is just cash. There's kind of an age old theme there that cash is king. So we want to see good cash balances. Are you turning over your receivables quick enough to maintain a solid cash balance, which is, again, always there to kind of be a backup, if you're getting slow paid or on a job from a general contractor.
Seth, how much working capital should a contractor have?
So
the answer is more, always more, from
as much as possible.
As much as possible. That's your first stack of bullets when you got a problem on a job site, because somebody's going to maybe not pay you slow, because somebody's going to have a problem somewhere. The only thing that you can control in the working capital world is how much you have on your own. And so whenever you ask a surety guy, hey, how much working capital should I have? Of course, there is a realistic limit to the amount of cash you'd want to keep around. But most surety organizations would advise you to keep as much cash around as possible in the working capital department, because that's typically the number one cause of failures for contractors. Is they don't necessarily have maybe they do have a big problem on a job, but what the real bullet that kills them is lack of cash. They got no capital to continue to pay their men and pay their bills. Then the bank shows up and puts the kibosh on the whole works.
And something you can do to supplement just your overall cash balances, in your savings, checking accounts, is getting operating lines of credit with the bank. Generally, sureties want to see you have an operating line of credit. They just don't want to see you use it. So high utilization of a bank line of credit is a red flag, I guess, for surety companies. But it's also very advantageous when you're looking at larger bonds or larger projects to have that operating line of credit sitting there as a backup or a cushion in case, say, your cash balance gets a little bit low because you're getting slow paid or you're waiting on retainage. You have that extra cushion there to be able to pay off some bills that are coming up due while you wait for that payment. Another thing that plays into working capital, that I kind of mentioned, monitor your receivables. Make sure you're staying on top of getting paid. I had a contractor in one of my territories in Ohio that was fairly well off. That got into some trouble collecting on his receivables, and it took him down basically overnight. Net worth, again, that's your total assets minus your total liabilities. That just gives you the overall ability of a contractor to withstand long-term losses. So that comes into play more of, do you have fixed assets and things like that you can sell off or something if you start hitting a period of losses, whether the economy is going down or you're just, the work is not.
There's some surety companies out there that always will argue that if you have net worth, you can generate working capital in a time of need. So you can liquidate things. Those sureties are kind of thinner in the crowd of sureties. The more sureties of the world are just going to be saying pure working capital. Yep. Net worth is commonly what you'd see in heavy equipment organizations, where they got a lot of big equipment that they could liquidate if needed, and they don't have nearly as much cash capability a lot of times. But for your rule of thumb, always remember the working capital is key.
Right, and generally you'll see higher net worth companies with heavy civil that have a lot of equipment and maybe don't need as much cash flow when they're not paying as much for material and things like that. Work in progress. The surety is going to look at a periodic work in progress report that you provide. They just want to track to make sure your jobs are staying profitable, you're maintaining margins. There's nothing really highly underbilled or overbilled for that matter. And then the last thing, they'll look at your overall indemnity package, who's signing the indemnity agreement. They'll take into consideration both the company's financial wherewithal as well as the personal indemnitors and, any other entities that they may own. Say you have a building that the company operates out of that's held in a different LLC. That'll all play into the part of what they look at as far as the capital of the company or the financial wherewithal. The second C is capacity. And when we talk about capacity, that's on an operational aspect. So what they'll look for is, is your experience consistent with what you're looking for bond capacity or this particular job you're looking at, whether it's a jump in job size or something maybe outside of your scope. A couple things they'll take a look at initially, resumes of, the owners and key team members, experience from previous companies. If a key team member is got experience running $25-30 million projects from a previous employer, that will play some part into what they're looking at for the current company. Doesn't play all, but it.
Yeah, one thing on that point, when you hire somebody new and you bring over a superintendent, an estimator, a key employee, and you say, boy, we got this stallion. This guy is going to put work on the books and it's going to be good work. He told me at his last job, he made him tons of money and they just didn't pay him enough. That's a little red flag for surety companies. They're not going to say, whoa, bad. They're just going to say, okay, let's proceed with caution though, because typically people who don't guarantee, so somebody who's not an indemnitor, somebody whose checkbook is not on the line, maybe it's a hired estimator, he doesn't care about your checkbook as much as he cares about putting work on the books. So the surety company says, all right, let's see some resumes on your key team members. And I'm excited about this, but if you got this new, what should be an excellent business development opportunity, just be aware that is a great thing, but it could take a couple of small growth opportunities to be able to prove within your own organization their skill set.
Yeah, because generally the companies they're coming from that he consistently did those projects, he basically had enough of the financial resources at hand to really kind of do what he wanted. Whereas this new company, if it's a newer company, they may not have the financial resources to support that size of job or that size of bond capacity. Contingency plans, that's just looking at plans that a company has in place for someone to step in immediately if something happens to one of the owners or a key team member. Is there a life insurance policy in place? That's just to make sure that any projects that are in progress, when that unforeseen event happens, there is a way or a guarantee to get that job, keep it moving on schedule and get it complete. Business plans, that's just, we're going to look at things like your plans for growth. How big do you want to be in the next 3, 5, 7 years, and kind of what you're projected in revenue and profits. So that way, that gives us a little more idea of what to expect and can be proactive in helping the companies grow their bond capacity. Other things like equipment and manpower, the surety wants to make sure that you've got enough equipment on hand, or your manpower, your labor pool is enough to handle any jumps in job size, or if you got to throw some extra guys on this job and that job, you have those resources available to you basically at a moment's notice. And you're not bidding jobs and then trying to go after the labor to supplement, which I have seen happen. We did have a contractor in one of my territories that decided that they were going to bid all kinds of jobs and then hire the people after the fact if they are actually awarded and it didn't turn out well for them.
Yeah, one rule of thumb, and maybe this is a slice of advice that I took from another surety guy, but you need the men. If you can't get the men before the job, sometimes they have to come hand in hand, but that is a very delicate balance. But he said, as far as equipment goes, I have never seen an equipment dealer not be able to get somebody excavators, bulldozers, and all sorts of backhoes after the job is there. So don't go trying to stock up an entire building of equipment on the job that you might get. And that's just a general piece of advice that I thought was pretty pointed. Now, of course, there are specific opportunities. Say somebody's unloading a big plow and there's only one in your area and it's a great deal on a big, D9 with a ripper or a plow on the back. I get it. It's not hard and fast forever, but just generally speaking, manpower is the key that surety guys jump at. Equipment is important, but if somebody's a surety guy and ever asks you, what are you doing for equipment? Well, I'm going to buy it when I get the job. Until then, though, I'm not going to go out on a big limb.
And then kind of the final C of the 3 C's is the character. And again, as I mentioned, that's the relationship that's formed. That's why a lot of times surety company underwriters will come out and visit their clients a couple times a year, just to develop that relationship. And you can gain a lot just by meeting with somebody face to face. It kind of creates that trust factor and strengthens it. Things like, your credit score will play a part into this. Strong relationships with subs and other contractors. Can we get good references from subcontractors, suppliers, engineers, things of that nature? Are they involved in organizations, NECA or NUCA or AGC, things like that. And so the relationships is really what drives this, though. Can we, as an underwriter, we develop the relationship with the agent. We'll trust a lot of what the agent says and suggests about ways to handle a contractor's bond program. There was times when I was an underwriter, I know that we're looking at stretching on a single job or their bonded backlog, and there'd be times where I would just kind of roll with what the agent told me because I trusted him and he was a big supporter of the client and basically would guarantee that everything was going to go well and they were going to be successful at the growth pattern that they're looking at. So the relationship really drives that portion of it.
Let's whip through complexity pretty quick, because I think one of the most important parts we're going to run into is a little bit of one, bid bond, performance bond, how do those all work together, and then two, how to improve these relationships, because many people on the seminar may already have a relationship, but they say it's good, but I don't know, it's just an email I send an account to, and I don't know, I don't get anything from them. So let's just run through the underwriting real quick on the project complexity.
Yeah, and so the second part of kind of things that we looked at as an underwriter, and that the surety will generally look somewhat into is the overall project that you're looking at. So they get a bid bond request. They're going to look at the complexity of the project. Is it within the scope of past experience for the contractor? Is there things like multi-year? Is it 2 or 3 years long when traditionally they did 6-month jobs? Is there a design build factor? Some of those things can drive up the risk of a particular project. Owner-driven complications. We always would hear through the grapevine when you've been working in a state long enough of who were kind of the difficult owners to work with and just weren't real cooperative with contractors when it came to change orders and things like that, or delays. Has a project owner been difficult to work with in the past? That can always drive up the risk. Contract language, things like liquidated damages, long tail warranties, and payment terms are all things you want to pay attention to that the surety may ask. Site conditions, are we working in the middle of a large city that's got a lot of traffic and has a bunch of traffic control involved? Or are they getting outside of what their normal area of operation is? Those are all things that come into play on site conditions. And then a surety will also verify project financing on the private side. If you're in a private project that's getting, they're asking for a bond, just make sure you want to verify that the financing's in place, because the last thing you want to happen is that you get halfway through the project, the financing runs out or gets cut off and you're stuck holding the bag to pay your suppliers and subs with no contract funds. A couple of risk drivers that a surety will tend to look for that causes them a little more heartache than the normal
These are the historical three largest factors that cause contractors big catastrophe problems. And so they definitely keep an eyeball out. When these three, this is kind of like driving at night on ice, guys. It's not that it's going to cause a problem, but as you continually add more factors that are proven to be difficulties, the surety companies slowly get a little bit less or a little bit more and more apprehensive. So what do you mean by geographic explanation, Seth, or expansion?
If you're going outside your normal area of operation, there's things that you got to take into account. Like there's going to be different inspectors and engineers. The laws and regulations are a little bit different. You're going to be working with a brand new pool of subcontractors and suppliers that you may not be familiar with. That's really the biggest issue there with geographic expansion. You get a sub on there you don't know, and just doesn't go as well as you were thinking. Then you run into problems with them, whatever, walking off a job or there's faulty work, things of that nature. Single job growth. This is one of the things that we saw a lot at my surety, that if there was a major jump in job size that we somehow got comfortable with, a lot of times any claims that we got on that thing was strictly due to the single job growth. They couldn't handle it, whether it was because of the operational capacity, the financial wherewithal just wasn't quite there. So when you're asking for a large jump in job size on a bond request, the surety's gonna underwrite that a little harder. And then moving into a newer, different type of construction. For example, an excavator moving into paving, they've got the equipment and stuff, but there's a little bit different type of cash flow there. You have to have a bunch of working capital to be able to pay off those kind of upfront costs to get asphalt and other material, to build that new road, versus just when you're moving dirt, there's generally not a lot of cash flow at the beginning of the project like that.
Yeah, little chip of advice on like single job growth. And this is a little bit out of the home cooking from our agency and maybe other good agents, of course. It's not like it's a secret, but this is how you can help your bond program grow and help yourself grow as a contractor. When you want to do a single job expansion, and we're talking probably 2 to 3 times larger than the largest project you've done, being able to maintain historical cost records on, let's talk about a real simple concept, for instance, a multifamily unit. Say, I'm an electrician and I've done $1 million sub package on a multifamily unit. And that was, call it 45 or 50 units or whatever the number is. And the next one you want to do is 3 times that big. And it's 3 times that big all the way around. The best way to help your surety get on board with that is to be able to produce, whether it's Excel, whether it comes out of Timberline, or whether it comes out of whatever estimating program that Matt has helped you get built, produce some documentation and say, here's what we estimated it at. Here's our dollars, our labor hours, and our material. And here's what we finished it at. We hit our estimate on this one. This next project, very similar, very comparable construction, just more repetitious units. And being able to lay down some numbers and hard data, surety guys are nerds. We all love numbers. So being able to throw that stuff down and say, I can prove to you that I can build this. I've done it successfully once before or twice before, or here's a pile of results. I'm just going to do it bigger now. So helping yourself in the future, help your future self today by keeping track of all that information.
Okay. And just a couple of things here to kind of finish this section, what other things do you need to be aware of when contractors are bidding a bonded job? A couple of things that the surety underwriters and in turn the contractors just kind of keep an eye out for: multi-year contract provisions. Projects over 2 years long are considered long-term. A surety is going to charge extra premium on that, so they're going to be more expensive, in addition to also being a little more risky because things outside of the contractor's control, such as the economy or a pandemic or whatever, can affect those multi-year contracts. Extended warranty provisions. Most warranty provisions are 1 year, although some states do 2 years. Colorado does 2 years, for example. And so anything beyond about 2 years, you want to keep an extra eye on. Again, going back to the things that are kind of out of the contractor's control over that extended period of time is what the surety's generally concerned about. Economy, things like a pandemic are play into that. Design build contracts. Anytime there's a design aspect that's under the contract of the general contractor, it's a little more risky, especially if there's no engineer involved and the contractor's basically doing the design portion on their own, because then the surety accepts the risk of the design on those contracts.
So any of these type of bonds, you guys just keep an eyeball out for. Multiple obligee, that's talking about when the bank wants to be named, or maybe somebody else wants to be named on it. Completion bonds, this is one little asterisk to keep an eyeball out for. If you see subdivision bond, landscaping bond, a landscaping bond guarantees that grass and trees will grow. It doesn't seem like a problem, but the only organization that can release you from that is the local city. And getting the city to give up a guarantee that the tree is going to be green and beautiful sometimes can be like pulling teeth. And that bond has to stay in force until they sign off on it. And so if you work in a cold weather climates and you're trying to punch out a job and say it's the last week in November and you're trying to get the GC says, I need this certificate of occupancy and there's trees in a right of way. That's one that it's not a big dollar penalty, but it is a pain to get put together and it does trip people up. So just be aware of that. Let your broker know, plenty of heads up on that kind of stuff, because it's just not a really easy one to do. And financial guarantee bonds, keep an eyeball out for anytime somebody has a full, what we call a full penalty bond. Basically it's an idea that, hey, if there's a failure on this contract, there's no remedy capable other than just writing a big old check from the surety company. And they will not be very excited about writing those for some of the same reasons as the landscaping bond. They're very difficult to cancel. And the only person that can let you off of them, or they're very difficult to get off of, and the only person that can authorize that is the group that doesn't want to give it up. So those ones there. Next slide, Seth, you want to throw us on to the next one? Yeah. Let's run into, before we get into these frequently asked questions, I know this is something that's always an interesting point. Seth, let's run through bid bonds and performance and payment bonds real quick.
Okay, I'm going to give you back control and then you click through.
Yeah, and so real quick though, we're just going to talk about bid bonds. If you see a bid specification, invitation to bid, it says bid security. It may be in the form of a 5% bid bond or cashier's check. What the 5% is a reference to, sometimes it's 10% federal work, a lot of times maybe 20%. That is a percentage of the amount that you are bidding that you're going to put up with your bid, put some money on the barrelhead, that if the contract is awarded to you, you can take it. And if you can't take it, you forfeit that money. So on a $100,000 contract, they either want a cashier's check or a bid bond to go in with your bid that says, hey, if I don't take this contract because A, I just decide to not do it, or B, well, I couldn't get a bond, so I can't take the contract, you're going to be at a potential risk of the owner just claiming your money. And so you keep an eye out for that. Now that 5% or 10%, sometimes I have folks ask me about this, is that my bond rate? No, that's not the bond rate. That just happens to be a percentage that the owner's requested. What the bid bond illustrates to the contractor and to the owner is that absent some particular instances, let's say you way overbid your authorized amount to bid, let's say there's a huge bid spread, you're way lower than somebody else, the surety only gives that bid bond. The bid bond's the pre-qualification to go to the bid and put some money on the barrelhead. The surety only gives that once they're ready to write the performance and payment bonds, the actual guarantees that are required on the job. And so that tells the owner that you've been pre-qualified, and that tells you, the contractor, that, hey, once I got this time-sensitive document that's due with my bid on bid day, I should be pretty dang near home free on making sure my bonds are available if I'm the low bidder. And that's where you want to price in that performance and payment bond into your bid. So generally speaking, bonds are going to run anywhere between 1% and 3%, depending on what type of underwriting you're going to help the surety guys do, and also what your financial condition is, I should say. So on bid day, bid requirement says bid security 5%. Okay, well, don't add 5% to your job, but when you have to provide a performance and payment bond, make sure you get an estimate from your broker so that you can add that in on your job. And so the long and short of the bid arrangement is that you don't necessarily need the bid bond, but if you get the job, you will likely need the performance and payment bond. So it's good medicine to get your bid bond ahead of time, start the underwriting process, get that prepared, get that ready to go with the owner. Now, if you're bidding a job to a general contractor, pretty common that you're not going to need a bid bond. Pretty common they're just going to say, call us before the bid and get us your number. We'll let you know if you're low. That's favorable to you as a subcontractor because you didn't have to put any cash up. Now, if we had an attorney here, he may tell you differently on the way that contract law works, and we'll leave that for another time. But by and short, you didn't hand them anything that guaranteed your number other than sending it to them. Some generals, they are asking for bid bonds, and then they got something of yours. They got 5% of the amount you're bidding, and if they want to hold you to it, they literally got a check with their name on it for 5% of the amount you bid. It's maybe not literally a check, maybe it is, but maybe it's a bid bond that's effectively about the same thing. So I think if you have any confusions on that, or if you say this still isn't clear, Tom and Seth, please send an email to Matt. They can he can get over to me. We can talk about it. I'd be glad to talk to you on the phone. If you're regionally different than Nebraska and the Midwest here, Seth has a Rolodex as long as either of our arms from his days as an underwriter of guys that were good agents. If you're in Maryland, we can find somebody to help you out. If you're in Kentucky, I got some buddies that are a great bond shop there. If you're in LA, we got some great contacts there. So if the bid bond, performance, and payment bond world, it gets kind of confusing, don't be alarmed. It is for a lot of folks, for a lot of seasoned professionals. Just give us a call. We'll run through it and we'll keep working with it. Seth, is there anything you'd like to add on that arrangement?
No, I think you covered that pretty well. I didn't have much else to add on that.
Just give me your quick, what's the best way to improve your surety relationship? Like, you're a contractor, you just got this bond guy's phone number from your insurance guy who says, hey man, I sell insurance, I don't sell bonds. Call this bond guy. How can you help best position yourself for a surety program and then growing it?
Developing that relationship is a big part of developing your bond program. Talk to your agent, let them know what you're trying to do, and be upfront about what your plans are for the future. There's nothing worse as an underwriter than getting a big surprise. And sometimes that happens because the contractor doesn't necessarily know about it. But if you develop that relationship with the agent and the surety company, and be proactive in sending updates and information, and keeping the relationship open and a lot of dialogue between it, it'll go a long ways when an underwriter gets a request for a bond from you that's a little bit more than what you've done in the past. You don't quite financially qualify for it, but you've been working together for so long, and there's been an open dialogue the entire time of the relationship that he can push for that when he's got to go to his boss and go to bat for you to get that particular bond done. So again, it's a relationship driven business. That'll go a long ways in helping your bond program and your bond capacity.
I think one of the things I would always stress to contractors is it's hard to place enough emphasis on accurate and timely financial information. And so if your QuickBooks are always a mystery, and there's even to yourself, and believe Seth and I have about 450 clients in our file cabinet here. And so that means we look at a lot of financial statements and a lot of quarterlies, a lot of interims. We get a lot of call-in accounts. Somebody says, I don't know what I do with the books. I send it to Lori in the office, and she sent it to so-and-so at the accounting. I don't know, man, it's a mess. Getting that straightened out, that's going to be a pinnacle of success as a contractor, and then also facilitating a quality surety relationship. Some of the best and most high-performing surety bonded contractors, as well as highest performing contractors we get to be around, have extremely accurate and extremely timely financial records. And a lot of that's because they need it for their estimating purposes. They need to know what to price their work at, because they look at the last time they did the job and they need to know what it cost then. All that information with a good CPA, he should be able to take that information, and it needs to be somebody that understands construction, because work in process construction accounting is its own animal. But somebody should be able to take that information, pour it into a machine, pour it back out of that computer, and show you, here's where you're making your money. You're making your money in outdoor electrical. We're not gonna screw around with this other stuff. Or you're making your money in simple structures of this size, or you're making your money in pipe work. Not in moving dirt, and truck dirt is not easy to make money in. And that type of information will hopefully help you make more money for yourself, and maybe help out your surety program as well as your bank program. So I think the most important thing you can probably do, aside from especially developing a good relationship, because this is a relationship business, is help yourself with as much as you can with the financial aspect. So few frequently asked questions. X part of I'm only doing a percentage of the projects, only need to bond that part, correct? That is correct. But the bond runs to the contract amount. So if your contract amount says you got $1 million worth of work from the $4 million total project, then you say, well, I'm only doing $250,000 of that because I'm subbing the rest of it out to a second tier sub. You bond the percentage, the portion of the work that's on your contract. So whatever that works out to be.
If you want to mitigate that risk, if you have a subcontract or a subcontractor, you can ask for a sub bond. Then that portion of the work, you transferred the risk over to that surety and that subcontractor.
I've started this project. Now the owner's asking me for a bond. Can they do that? Can I get that? Or maybe it's the general contractor is asking the sub for a bond partway through. Well, certainly we do that all the time, but expect a question from the surety company or from your broker saying, hey, yeah, we'd love to do this, but we're going to need the owner and the architect or the owner or the general or somebody to sign off that they don't have a problem that they're aware of, that they're trying to get a bond, so that in about wait for that time period to be at maybe 1 month, and then they're going to file a claim on you. And it was there all along, but they're just trying to buy the bond after the car has crashed. And that's something that it becomes a pain in the rear, but it just takes a little bit more paperwork. Totally possible. So this is a little bit further discussion on bid bonds for anybody that wants to review that discussion from earlier that we were talking about. Here's some good information on it. One thing about a bid bond, if you did make a tabulation error, you did have a demonstrable error, there is a lot of historical law that allows for the owner or whoever's taking your bid bond to let you out of your bid. So for instance, I had a contractor who was extremely low about 3 weeks ago on a job. Second place contractor got the job. I talked to my guy. I said, hey, I didn't want to stick my nose into that one too far, but what happened there? And he said, oh, I submitted my job and I had an error. I didn't have a line item for the flat work. And I had a demonstrable computer error that there is no item there. It just, my bid tab didn't have it in. And so the owner was saying, oh yeah, that's fair. I'm not going to hold you to go build this thing for my own enrichment. So keep that in mind. But generally speaking, it's a pretty firm guarantee unless the owner wants to be flexible with you.
Hey, Tom, I know we're getting close on time here, and we got a little bit of a late start, but want to let everybody know that the slides will be available. The webinar is being recorded as well, so we will send out that information. But if you do have some additional questions, please submit them. I do have a few here to ask you guys, but let me.
Let's go with questions.
Okay. I appreciate everybody sticking around here a little bit longer than usual. But the first question is, what if I'm just starting out? How do I get a bond?
Seth, you want to run with that one, or you want me to take the lead and you follow?
The first thing you want to do, you need to find a surety agent. That would be, for example, Gene Lilly Surety Bonds. Ask your coworkers or your other people in the industry that you know who the agents are around that they may have worked with before. Once you find a surety bond agent, then you can start working, and they can look at they'll ask for certain information and get to know you a little bit better, and they'll be able to guide you on the best way or the best method to obtain kind of your first surety bond, whether that's a credit-based program, or you've been in business for a couple of years and you just haven't needed a bond until now, and they'll set you up with a surety that'll fit your needs the best.
There's a couple of ways to get your first bond. Sometimes they are just a pure credit application form. These are pretty expensive. They're 3%. It's typically what happens when somebody doesn't want to do a little bit of extra work and get you to a reasonable price. A lot of times those come from insurance agents. And I have a lot of friends that are insurance agents. Insurance agents generally aren't bond guys. Bond guys generally aren't insurance agents. A lot of insurance agents said, "Oh, I can get you that bond." And that is true. They can sometimes get stuff. But for your best future, if surety is going to be something you want to be able to have the capacity for, you're going to want to start maintaining and developing personal financial statements, annual financials on your company. And especially, let's unfortunately uncouple so much focus on tax planning at the end of the year. A lot of times you talk to a tax-minded CPA and he'll say, "Well, you're making a little bit too much money this year. Let's go buy up a bunch of stuff and get rid of a bunch of income." He's trying to make the company look as weak as possible. I prefer that for a tax purpose. Of course, I don't like taxes. If we had the camera on, you'd see the gigantic flag in the back of my screen that you can see I'm not a big fan of taxes. But surety companies want to see you be as strong as possible. So if you're thinking about getting into the surety world, one of the things to keep in mind, it's going to take a little bit of taxes being paid to retain some cash and grow the balance sheet. So if you want to get started, just give us a call, send Matt a message. If you're in our area, we'll help you. It is that relationship business. So if you're outside of our area, we have a lot of contacts and good agents that are in other parts of the country. We'll for sure get you set up with somebody that I've either met, Seth's met, somebody knows, and they'll get you going.
The second question I have here, are there any challenges or concerns due to COVID when it comes to bonding?
The surety companies. No, honestly, there have been concerns. Every surety company is based in Hartford, Connecticut as their not every one of them, but a lot of them are based in Hartford, Connecticut as their regional home office. Then they're also underwritten by reinsurance organizations that are either in Boston or New York. What I'm kind of getting at is there's some very big cities that these guys and gals work in that haven't been on the inside of their offices since the first week of March. A lot of surety guys don't live in the world that the contractor lives in. I don't care if there's COVID out there. We got to build stuff to pay our people and feed our families. And so it's really caused somewhat of an issue for some surety companies because they look out into the newspaper out in the, they go, "Are you guys even able to go to work today?" As every contractor puts on their mask and goes into work. So it's created more of a cultural issue than an actual specific issue. Everybody wants to know though, what is the contractor's contingency plan for if a job gets stopped? Yeah. And a lot of it comes down to contractor planning. What's your contingency plan? And then just give your agent, your broker, the surety company, give them plenty of time because people are working from home. And, if you've got a request for a bond, sometimes a 2-day turnaround works when everybody's in the office and somebody can walk down the hall. But man, I'd be lying if I didn't say stuff slowed down a couple of days because somebody's doing their laundry at 4:00 on a Thursday afternoon when I need them to be sitting at their desk, and just stupid things like that.
Sure. Well, those are the only questions I have submitted here. So wanted to get those out there. Tom and Seth, I will provide your contact information in our follow-up email that is sent out so people can get a hold of you directly if they have some bonding questions, or they can visit your website. But with that, if anybody has any remaining questions, please get those submitted because we will get wrapped up. And again, I want to thank both Tom and Seth for taking time out of your schedule. I know both of you are extremely busy, so I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your expertise with all of us. Even though I've been in the industry for over 20 years, still able to pick up little bits and pieces each time I hear something about bonds. So I appreciate that. I want to say thank you to everybody that was on the call or is still on the call. Hopefully you found some information or some value in this that maybe little tidbits here and there that you weren't quite sure about bonding. Definitely think, the common theme that I took from today is relationship and communication are probably two of the biggest factors to develop that successful partnership between the contractor and the bonding company. So any final words from either of you, Tom or Seth?
Nope.
Yeah.
And as Tom said, just if you have any questions, and Matt mentioned too, let us know. When I was an underwriter, my territories covered Arizona to North Carolina. So we have a lot of contacts and things if you're outside of Nebraska or the surrounding states that we can find somebody to help you out with that's a little more local if you need. So feel free to reach out.
My parting gift or my parting words, I think, and this is from the desk of Tom Schlafer, who's probably one of the best surety guys in the biz, who's retired now. But there's three main functions of every construction company. And if you can't do all three of them really well, it's going to be difficult. You got to be able to bid the work, you got to be able to build the work, and you got to be able to account for the work. And all of those need to interface with each other. When those three pieces all are firing on all cylinders, the accounting department feeds the estimating department the best information. The estimating department feeds the field team good information, and the field team feeds the estimators what real production numbers are. That all goes back to the accounting department. You'll find a lot more success. And when those three things are all present, the success is financial in your pocket as well as surety credit coming from your agency and your company partners. So with that, give us a call if you have any further questions, and we'll do whatever we can to help.
Great. Thanks, guys. Again, I appreciate your time today. And thank you to everybody who was in attendance. As always, we do our webinars each month. The last Wednesday, we had scheduling conflict today to push it back from our normal 11 o'clock time. So we'll kind of get a judge from the surveys of what time people like better. And again, I appreciate everybody sticking with us through the technical difficulties we had there at the beginning. So please watch your email for a follow-up email from this webinar with the slides as well as a link to the recording, and hope to see you next month on our next webinar. So have a great rest of your week, everyone. Thank you.